Alert Media.
Hello, my fellow Dreadites. Welcome back to the Dread Alert podcast. I'm Vince, and today I'm joined by Michael Wehunt, the author of the fantastic The October Film Haunt. Michael is also the author of a series of short stories called Greener Pastures, and we're going to dive in to this unique found footage-esque novel that I absolutely loved, and it's currently on my top 5 list of best novels for 2025. Michael, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, Vince. Happy to be here.
So your book, The October Film Haunt, recently hit shelves. I read it. I loved it. As I mentioned, it's currently on my top 5 books of 2025 list. And I want to know, for people who haven't read it yet, tell me a little bit about what it's about.
Well, the book revolves around a supposedly cursed film called Proof of Demons that came out around the year 2009. And there's a bit of backstory that takes place in 2013 where this group of three friends called the October Film Hunt would visit the filming locations of their favorite horror movies, kind of tap into the vibe, get inspiration from them, try to find the magic that might have been left behind in the soil, so to speak. And one night they camped out at the cemetery where part of Proof of Demons was filmed, and then everything went wrong after that. All the fame they were starting to amass, the movie deals, screenwriting deals, things like that, their influencer statuses all fell apart when somebody died as a result of their blog. And one of the three friends who were the October Film Hunt actually died as well. And this is all revealed in little chunks throughout the book as you go, so you really understand how devastating it was to the main character, Jory, who a decade later has retreated to northern Vermont and she has an 8-year-old son now. She's trying to live a very quiet life, and she's cut horror out of her world entirely, and which has left a hole in her. And then one day, a videotape shows up in the mail, and she can't help herself. She puts it in the VCR, and it soon starts to become apparent to her that there might be somebody out there making a sequel to Proof of Demons, and they want her to be involved in it, whether or not she's interested. And she is definitely not interested, and soon learns that that doesn't matter to these people. And there are some other characters who start to intersect with her world, a few different POVs going on, and you're reading the book. It's kind of a mystery, like, who are these people? What do they want? Is the director of the original film involved? Who is that director? No one knows. Everyone assumes it's a pseudonym. And then it just, kind of branches out into this meta horror sort of kind of found footage sort of vibe. And
Yeah.
things get pretty crazy and scary.
I'll say that, first of all, yes, entirely scary. And it really did capture found footage in a novel fashion, which I never thought that would be something that I would encounter, a found footage style novel. It really worked for me as someone who loves the genre. I'll also say that it really hit close to home as someone who was recently at Monroeville Mall doing a behind the scenes tour of Dawn of the Dead filming locations. A lot of our content revolves around going to these locations. So you hit me right in my horror sweet spot with this one, I have to say. Um, Tell me a little bit about how you got started writing. I know that you had written some short fiction in the past, and here you are with a novel. What was your process like? How did you get started?
Well, I'd always wanted to be a writer, but for various personal life reasons that I won't go into, it just got delayed and delayed. But I never let it leave my mind. And finally, I was just realizing that before too long, I felt like I was going to get too old to do it. So I just did it. And, it seemed to me, not really knowing how that world worked, that the way you do it is you write short stories, you find your voice, you hone your craft. And, it's a lot of fun to start out small and discover yourself and get to know yourself. So I just had fun writing all these different types of stories, and it's a path so many different writers take, and I think it's a pretty dependable path if you have patience. It can be a very long road because what I wanted to do was write stories, gain some sort of name recognition, put out a collection of stories. Hopefully, it would do well. And I was one of the lucky ones because, Greener Pastures, my first collection, was, very successful for a tiny press book. And it kind of put me on the map. And, kept writing short stories. You could even say I was putting off writing a novel because it's this big, scary thing. Eventually published a second collection of short stories called The Inconsolables. And then I was like, well, I can't write a third collection of stories. I need to write this novel. And at this point, it was really building up in me, and the reluctance was gone. It was starting to become a hunger. So there's a story in Greener Pastures, that first collection, which I wrote 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. But it's called October Film Hunt Under the House. And that's kind of obviously the genesis of this novel. And it had always been a favorite of readers. I had always seen comments on social media and Reddit and places like that talking about how much people like the story. And then this idea kind of started clicking into place where like, okay, well, I don't want to just expand a story into a novel. I want to do something, a lot more and a lot deeper than that. So like, well, I'll have a different film at the heart of the novel than was at the heart of the short story. And then I was like, well, it's going to be an entirely different group calling themselves the October Film Hunt that actually predated the one in the story. And then ideas were ping ponging around. And, you know, the easy short answer to how I got to the novel was it was time to write a novel. There's a logical trajectory that an author sees before them, and everybody knows that way more people read novels than short stories. So if you want to expand your world and expand your readership, the novel is the logical place to go. So, and here I am.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're here with us today. And I have to ask, is the October Film Haunt Under the House, would you consider that canon to the sort of universe of the October Film Haunt, the novel?
It is for a very big reason that I don't want to get into because it
For
kind
sure.
of would be a spoiler. You kind of have to read the novel to know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
But I also did some, you know, if you've read Stephen King's The Dark Tower, when you get toward the end of that series and, King brings himself in as a character, and therefore a lot of his books enter the story, like books we as readers know, like, oh, why is he talking about insomnia? I read that. There was a point in The Dark Tower where Stephen King kind of retroactively made some of his Dark Tower connected books canon and made some of them almost like tricks and like removed the canon status from them. And I thought that was really interesting. So, in a much smaller scale way, there is one way in which the novel, The October Film Haunt, kind of unravels the short story a little bit and takes something away from it. But I also think it gives something to it. So it was kind of like an even push pull sort of thing. So, but again, I'm sorry to be so vague, but I don't want to give anything
I
away.
I don't want any spoilers in this podcast either because some of the reveals in this novel were just truly breathtaking, and playing detective was a lot of the fun of reading this for me personally. So yeah, I think spoiler free is the way to go. Did you find a difference in process when you're writing the novel versus writing short stories? Was your actual like day to day grind and on your keyboard kind of was it different?
Very different. I knew it would be, and I wasn't wrong. When I write short stories, I don't plan them at all. I love to just wander in. I kind of think of it as like walking into the woods or into an abandoned building with a flashlight whose batteries are about to die, and you can only see a tiny few feet up in front of you. And so I love that sense of discovery, not knowing what's going to happen, and then I light up a few more feet, and then I start to see the shape of where the story needs to go. And in a short story, it's easy to get away with that because if you do make a wrong turn, you don't have to backtrack very far. Um, at most, you're giving yourself a few extra days of editing and rewriting or, whatever. But, I'm talking like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words total. It's just really not that much work. So you can take that risk and you can go off in this direction and just see what happens. But in a novel, you could be 40,000 words in, 60, 70,000 words in, make a wrong turn, break everything, and then you have months or weeks of work ahead of you. And that's just not really doable. I have a day job, I'm very busy, I only have a certain little segment of writing time available to me in a day, so I have to make the most of that time. So the biggest difference in process was I had to plan ahead. I had to I won't call it a full-fledged outline. I would like to try writing a novel fully on an outline one day, but I did have a map. I knew all the major plot points. And at the very least, I would plan ahead like 100 pages or so, like pretty like substantial stretches of the future of the novel. So I always knew where I was going. I always knew what my goals were, what my connecting points were, because it's a lot to hold in your head. That's another reason you really have to plan because you have multiple characters, all these extra pages, all these extra events, and you just can't hold that intricate skeleton inside of your mind. It just maybe if I had a more mathematical mind, but it's just something that I had to have on paper somewhere, so I knew where I was going. And it's also very different to write a novel because, again, in a short story, another luxury you have is you can be as experimental as you want. You can make an ending super ambiguous where like the reader's just like, what? As long as it's the ending that's earned, as long as you earn it, you can do anything you want. You can experiment with form, structure, voice, tense. There really are no rules. It's the way I look at it. I write short stories about just whatever, and they can even be like there are short stories that almost have no plot. They're more like tone poems or impressionistic, scenes or whatever. Can't do things like that in a novel. You're entering a wider, broader marketplace and a readership that expects, you know, high stakes, character arcs, certain plot beats to hit roughly at certain points along the way. Even I'm including myself in this group as a reader too. Like we're kind of programmed to expect certain things at certain times. The tables have turned against the protagonist. Now things are looking up again. Oh no, the antagonist has the upper hand. That kind of thing. So I also kind of felt like I had to. I already knew the rules because I've read so many novels in my life, but I had to learn the rules as they pertain to me personally, and so when I set forward on this journey, I would have that. I thought of it as like a guide with me holding up the rule book saying, remember to do this, remember to do that, having post-it notes everywhere. Uh, so that was very, very different. And probably maybe the biggest thing of all was just feeling like I was working within a traditional frame, and I wanted to break it where I could get away with it, and I wanted to experiment where I could. I wanted to do things that aren't normally done because that's really interesting to me. I didn't want to do anything that was paint by numbers, but I also had to like loosely stay within the lines. I couldn't, just to use a ridiculous example, I couldn't write a 10-page scene describing a forest with nobody in it, like people would be bored out of their minds. But in a short story, I could wander off and just do whatever I wanted. So I think those are the two big things.
Yeah, and you have a number of characters to manage, so I think keeping track of that must have been a challenge. Planning forward and also probably planning back because a lot of these characters have a very interconnected backstory that gets revealed throughout the novel too. Um, I was very much so attached to a few characters, much to my dismay, of course, and I was very much so uh, along for this ride. Like I mentioned at the start of our conversation, the setup of the novel hits very close to home for me as a horror fan. And I think what you do really well with these folks is you give them horror credentials and they've earned them on the page. So these people know their horror. It makes me think that you must be a horror fan as well at the end of the day. And I wonder what has drawn you to the horror genre?
I mean, my ultimate answer is I don't know, but it goes back to when I was 7 and I somehow was allowed to watch The Exorcist, which is weird. I kind of feel like people don't believe me when I say that, and I think it's because I kind of don't believe myself when I say that, but it is true. I've had, conversations with my parents about it, but my mom doesn't remember why I was allowed to watch it or who let me watch it. She just remembers that I did, and she kept a close eye on me to make sure I didn't have nightmares and I didn't have trouble going to sleep and things like that. And she said I was perfectly fine, and I was already asking her to watch another horror movie, so it was a pretty strong love right from the beginning. And when I was also really little, I would actually have a story based on this story, but when I was a little kid, I would lie in bed at night and I would kind of peek through the curtains, and there was a street lamp down on the street a little off to the side, and I would pretend there was a vampire standing under it, under the light. And he was watching me, I was watching him, and then I would say, "You can come in." And then I would close the curtains and lie down on the bed in the dark, just close my eyes, and I would imagine the vampire coming into the house, coming down the hallway, coming into my bedroom, and just standing by the bed watching me. And I was basically just trying to scare myself. And, looking back, I was like, okay, I wanted to be scared. For some reason, from a very young age, had I had such a thrill from this visceral feeling that you can feel on your skin, that tingle. And I've never been one to be scared during movies or books, but there's this, there's that visceral feeling that I've been chasing my whole life. And so I keep coming back to the genre over and over and over again. I've always been a big horror movie person, and I actually went many years without reading horror from like my mid-teen years into my 20s, but I always knew I was going to come back, and I did. And when I did come back, I really, really immersed myself in it and kind of filled in all the gaps. But it's a very versatile genre. It's a very useful genre. It can be used for social commentary in a way that nothing else really can. It can be a way to look at ourselves and to examine ourselves and question ourselves. It can be a way to examine society, of course. But I think in the end, it's really just about that chill that just, races up my arm and goes up my spine and makes me twist in my seat. That's probably the most I'll ever get while I'm watching a horror movie, but it's so precious. And, the horror community is a really great community. All the like-minded people, they tend to be really nice people. And I just wanted to write a book that was kind of a love letter to all that.
I think it captures it perfectly. And as highbrow as we pretend to be here at Dread Alert Media, talking about horror being the projector screen on which we throw our fears to externalize them and safely deal with them, and the community of outcasts sitting alone together in the dark of the cinema that is the horror community, and how we band together as outsiders. I think you hit the nail on the head in a way that no other guest yet has talked about on our podcast, and that I probably haven't touched on in any of my editorial content, and it's that chasing the thrill of maybe for me it was peeking behind the corner and watching the opening scenes of Halloween 2 or seeing Pumpkinhead at way too young an age. I came across The Exorcist a little later, but yeah, it's we're all chasing the dragon on that. I think you nailed it. Do you have a favorite subgenre of horror? Is there anything that you gravitate towards?
Mm, I mean, over the course of my life, I would definitely have to say found footage would probably be my favorite subgenre, but I also have a real soft spot for slashers. Um, I think slashers are a kind of movie that you can watch with a group of friends. Even if they don't like horror, it's easier to get people to gather around and watch a slasher movie. And horror can be more fun when you're watching it with other people. It's not a prerequisite, but um and like the mystery element of slashers, the methodical one by one nature of it is just so comforting. But I think ultimately I would still have to go with found footage. It was um not my first love because they weren't quite around yet, but I just they can do something to me that nothing else can. I'm a little more likely to get that shiver,
Mhm.
so I would have to go with that.
I think those are probably my two choices as well. There's an immediacy to found footage that makes it believably scary in a lot of cases. Although I've seen some pretty fantastical found footage films lately. Um, but even something as recent as Strange Harvest made my skin crawl. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in that subgenre. So I tell me a little bit more about this story and how it plays with found footage, because it really hits an interesting crossroad between sort of metafiction and analog horror and digital horror and found footage. What kind of broke this open for you? How did you kind of decide where you were heading with this story and how all these elements came together?
Yeah, well, the original short story I mentioned earlier actually is fully found footage. It involves exclusively found materials, most of which were in a journal. It's just various journal entries. This group of friends like trading the journal off. Like they write their entry, they give it to the next person. Then there's some interstitial things kind of stitched in there. So when I started conceptualizing the novel, I had the first question, obviously, it was like, do I want to write a novel that's fully found footage? And, um, there's actually a novel called Widow's Point by Richard Chismar and his son, Billy, or I think he goes by W.H. Chismar, came out the same day the October Film Hunt did. And I have it, but I haven't read it yet, but it's fully found footage. I think every single word of the book is found footage. When I was starting off to write mine, I knew that I didn't want to do that. Um, I want to do it one day because it sounds really fun. and it would be a really big challenge. But the one big limitation of found footage, when you take away the visual, you no longer have much opportunity for emotional resonance, character development. Um, you can't jump distances as easily as you could. So if you have a character in Vermont and a character in Toronto, you can't just switch to a camera in Toronto, or unless you want to change the whole way you're doing the found footage, you know. But the main reason was I wanted to have a lot of traditional narrative because I wanted to explore someone's interior monologue, so to speak, with a lot more freedom. And I wanted the readers to get to know my protagonist Jory more intimately. I wanted them to become attached to her, and also to Beth and Coleman and Roger when they come into the story. I wanted them to connect with them emotionally. And with found footage, really can only do that through dialogue. And I just didn't want to write a book that was just a bunch of dialogue. And because everything outside of the dialogue is going to be through a detached perspective, and I just didn't want to do it that way. So, I could, but I wanted it to, in spite of all that, I wanted the book to feel a little bit like found footage. And so I started visualizing basically some people making a found footage movie in my novel, and what would that be like? And I've always thought it was an interesting twist to imagine a found footage movie where the antagonist have the camera, because it's what could be more invasive than having someone film you? That's really, really scary. So I had a good scary chunk to work with just based on that alone. So if a found footage movie is being made and I'm writing about it with a traditional narrative, I can kind of have the best of both worlds. So I started thinking about that and looking at it from that angle. And then some more pieces clicked into place. And then I have, little interstitial Reddit posts and magazine articles, Wikipedia entries, just a piece of an old zine that was, torn out. Um, so then I was able to add the found materials angle to it, provide some backstory without requiring my characters to just kind of stop what they're doing and explain something, So I thought it was a more fluid and more unique and more fun way to do that. And that kind of upped the found footage feel a little bit. So, and I also really wanted to work in a bit of a slasher feel because I love slasher movies too. There are, most diehard horror fans love slashers. So, got some guys with knives, and then, also wanted to kind of put in some demonic possession elements. The movie that the book revolves around is called Proof of Demons, after all. So there's going to be the chance for some demon possession. So I kind of wanted to kind of mash up these elements that aren't put together very often and just have fun with it and see what would happen if you have. It's almost like three different horror story uh, subgenres kind of melding into one, just to see what madness would happen.
Oftentimes things like that aren't super effective, but this works. And I feel like there's something in this book for everyone, be it, the style of the writing and the narrative structure, and where you deviate from expected plot points, to the actual, I don't know, antagonists, the villains, the creatures, in some cases that we're approaching. And I really enjoyed the themes of this book. For me personally, I have my daughter, at the time of this recording, is going to be 2 in 2 days. So parenting horror is something that's very interesting to me. So a lot of Jory's horror. I mean, there's Jory goes through the ringer in this book. You put her through a lot. But a lot of the horror that resonated with me was the fears, the parental fears that she experiences. And it's central to the narrative in a lot of ways. I also saw a lot of themes of guilt. And what also jumped out to me as a content creator are the themes of integrity and responsibility with your online presence and with what you do with your platform. Those themes being noted, is there something you'd like the reader to leave with when they close the page on that fantastic ending?
Yeah, I think for me the biggest central question is just what is belief
Mm,
in today's world, and what you're saying about being online and responsibility and integrity, that all plays into this central question. Um, because I was, not to get off on too much of a tangent here, but I I'm pretty fascinated with the fact that, people throw around the term, oh, we're living in a post-truth era. And, that's been, you see that term a lot in newspaper articles and, the news and political discourse. But it really is true. And it's not just about politics anymore. It's really infected us to the point where you see something and a lot of people don't even go through the thought process of deciding whether or not it's real, going and fact checking it, and going through the logic journey to come to a conclusion about it. They just see something and they say, "Oh, that's true. Wow." And with AI coming in, it's gonna, it's gonna get even harder and more chaotic. And I have a lot of fears and concerns about that. I'm just glad that I wrote this novel before AI really, really started to sink its claws into us, because I would have had no choice but to make the novel a little bit different. Because I'm very grateful. I got under the wire. It's like this novel can talk about its themes and be the last one to do so pre AI. You know, because I'm sure a lot of horror books are going to be coming out that deal with AI, and they're going to be terrifying. I'm just glad I don't have to be one of them, because things were already bad enough before AI got into the mix. But going back to what is belief, if if someone wants something to be true, they'll just believe it's true. And if the facts don't fit, they'll bend them to fit, or they'll just ignore them entirely. So I was wondering how that would pertain to an urban legend or a modern folklore kind of situation, because nowadays that would all be online. You know, the internet is the modern campfire, it's the modern, like, gossip corner, water cooler, it's everything. So anything like that was going to happen would happen online today, and therefore it could spread so much more widely, so much more deeply. And I just became really curious if something, a cult, was to gain enough popularity to start kind of dipping into the public consciousness on a wider level, would it have the opportunity to spread and become viral or become a meme, however you want to look at it. And if enough people started to believe in it, that it was true, what would be the possibilities there? Because when you live in a world where something that is not true can be believed in so hard that it might as well be true, and it has more power than the truth, then that starts to feel occult to me.
Mhm.
Because if you go back a few hundred years and kind of try to define the word occult, it's not too different than our reality today. So that
Yeah.
really fascinated me, and so I just wanted to look at, what is belief? Does belief matter? Do facts matter? What is the power of belief? And if you believe in something strongly enough, can it change the reality of that thing? And then obviously, as you pointed out, the responsibility of someone on the internet, especially someone who has a lot of influence and a large platform, they need to be mindful of these things and careful with how they word things and careful of if they're going to tell a white lie, they need to make sure it's really, really small and that it can't do anybody any harm. So when the reader finishes the book and closes it, first of all, they would think about belief. Like, what do I want to believe about what I just read, which is kind of an acting out of that theme, which, kind of interested me. And maybe the takeaway would be just to be a little more mindful when you're online and when you're coming across information that might not be true. Like, just take a minute to try to find out whether or not it's true. I think it's something we can all do better about.
Absolutely. And it's not going to get any easier. It's interesting that you mention the belief becoming reality. That's the very crux of chaos magic from the 70s or 60s, 70s. It's an actual occult practice that's an interesting to watch it play out in novelization form. But the when I closed the book, first of all, belief was on my mind, but really what was anchoring me is we were doing coverage of a giant convention that weekend, and I was like, I don't have a large platform at the moment, but I have a large enough platform that my words matter, and it matters to the people I interview, and it matters to the people whose films I review, whose books I review, and it was just a nice reminder that words have power, uh, and sometimes your words are taken in ways that you don't intend. You have to be very careful. Our goal here is to empower horror fans and horror filmmakers, horror authors to express their love of horror. And we have to be very good shepherds of how we do that, who we help, and hopefully who we hurt. Well, hopefully not who we hurt. um, I wonder, do you have a? These are questions that we ask everybody who comes on the show. We're going to change gears a bit. I wonder, do you have a favorite found footage or analog horror story, book, or film? You can give me one of each of those categories. You can give me just a film, just a story, just a book, but analog or found footage, what gets you excited?
Well, my favorite found footage movie is also my favorite horror movie, period. So I might eat up your next question. I'm not sure what you're gonna ask, but
No.
my favorite found footage movie and favorite horror movie is The Blair Witch Project. I just I've seen it 30 times. I don't know how many times I've seen it. I watch it every couple years and it's just I love it every time. It never loses any of its power. I defended it 100 times online. I will pick up my flag and my torch and I will march forth into a defense of that movie. I just love it so much. And there's the historical significance of it. There's the unique marketing plan that
Mhm.
was lightning in a bottle and couldn't ever be replicated. It's like everybody would be on to the trick at that point once that movie came out. But even all that aside, like I just think it's a great, great, great movie. I think it plays with temporal space and time in a Lovecraftian cosmic horror sort of way that people really don't acknowledge that often. And
Yes.
when you really step back and think about those woods they were in, like something was the woods were changing around them. That's the only thing that really makes sense. And they definitely hint at it and it's there to pick up on. I'm not trying to say I'm some scholar, but it's just such a brilliant movie and it's so effective and it's so minimal and I'll always love that movie. My favorite found footage book, like book length, would probably be, and I'm trying to think of things that are purely found footage where there's no no first person long form narrative, just
There are
just
no
found
rules.
just found materials. I would probably do The Last Days of Jack Sparks. by
I have to add
Jason Arnott, I think is his name.
I have to
Um,
add that to my list. I don't think I've read this.
it's really good. Either that or Last Days by Adam Neville. I like both of those a lot.
Last Days is
Um,
fantastic as well.
and if I remember Last Days, I'm pretty sure that that's 100% found footage. I kind of want to be a purist for this question. Either one of those, they're just really fantastic. And I'll throw in a short story too. Gemma Files wrote a story with her husband, Stephen Barringer, years ago called Each Thing I Show You is a Piece of My Death. And it's only about 7,000 words. It's pretty short, but it is an absolutely phenomenal found footage story. It is just, I cannot speak highly enough of that story. I will cherish it for the rest of my life. It's very briefly, it's about these two people trying to make an experimental film. They're, wannabe filmmakers, and they kind of stumble across this phenomenon where I don't want to give too much away, but basically someone records themselves committing suicide, and the camera keeps running and their body starts to break down and decay. And somehow the camera is just continuing to film this, and it kind of goes into like a time lapse sort of thing. And then after that, the man who killed himself is starts showing up in other people's movies. Like say
Mm.
the new this isn't an example from the story, but just say like the new Mission Impossible movie, this dead man would be in that movie, and no one knows how he got there. The editor is like, he wasn't in this movie, It's just I don't want to say anything else, but it's an incredible story, and you can Google it and you can find it. It's free to read online. So
That's such a selfish question for me to ask because every time I ask it, I either get a new film or a new book or a new short story to add to my list. And I don't know, I'm better for having spoken with you and with all of the people who come on this show. And a wonderful bow to put on this conversation would be the Blair Witch Project, which is probably my number two or number three favorite film of all time as well. I have the behind me, without going and showing you, I have all the old like young adult novelizations and the dossiers and like I met the cast. I'm a Blair Witch super fan, and you may hate me after this, but I just did a short video in defense of Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 because I think that viewed from the right angle and with the right mindset, there's a lot to love in that film as well. Just the whole series. It's the world building for me, the marketing campaign, what's happening between the frames, so to speak. I love it. Yeah.
this is a little rude, but I'm gonna find this photograph that I want to show you real
Oh,
quick
please.
because
That's fantastic.
it's definitely on point to what we are talking about. Here it is. I'm gonna hold it up to the camera.
Oh, I saw that on Instagram and I said to my wife, I said, Sarah, Heather is endorsing the October Film Hunt. I was like, this is fantastic. We actually, speaking of the October Film Hunt as a group of people, one of our videos that is pinned on our TikTok page and is going pretty good right now is us exploring the filming locations in Seneca Creek State Park for the Blair Witch Project. Where we with the shack and the shanty. We didn't make it to Coffin Rock on this trip, but we showed some previous footage of when we went to Coffin Rock. So, man, what a nice bow on this conversation. Us in Seneca Creek and your favorite film. Um, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you online if they want to stay involved with what you have going on, or if they want to find out more about the October Film Hunt?
Well, you can find me at michaelwehunt.com. I wish I were more active on there, but I do keep my bibliography page updated. Like I have a press podcast page where you can find links to read stuff and interviews and such. Social media, I'm probably most active on Instagram, just Michael Wehunt author, but I'm on most of the major platforms. But Instagram seems to be the one platform today where you can kind of sort of unplug from the world. You know, you just watch videos of cute dogs if you want, if you just need to decompress, where if you go on, Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you're not gonna get that sort of decompression. You're just gonna be bombarded with terrible, depressing things all day.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything you're working on next that you want to give a plug to, or that people should keep an eye out for that you can talk about? You don't have to talk about anything you're not ready to.
Not much in the immediate future, but I my second novel will be coming out. We're hoping exactly 1 year after the October film hunt. So just September 2026. Keep an eye out on that. I'll be talking about it on social media before I even know it. But um, I did write my first short story in 4.5 years, which felt really nice. And that's going to be coming out in an anthology, but I don't know when, or it could be after the next novel for all I know. We don't have an publication date on that. So, but right now it's just, the October film hunt and then my back catalog. But I am excited about this next novel. It's going to be leaner and darker. I know the October film hunt's dark, but it's in a way this new one's going to be even darker and just it's going to bite harder.
Well, I will be a reader of that novel for sure, and I will be working my way through your back catalog. You have earned, and I want to say stress earned a new fan in me. This novel was well written. It was masterfully done. The descriptions of those VHS tapes were visceral and scary, and I had an absolute blast, as much as you can have a blast, as a blast with a novel that dark. Um, with this. It was fantastic. I'm so grateful that you took some time to speak with us today. And yeah, thanks for being on the show.
It was an absolute honor, but I do have to ask, what's your number one favorite horror movie?
Oh, my number one favorite horror movie is going to be Halloween. And I know that's an easy answer, but after I saw Scream in theaters when I was 13, Scream gave me like a roadmap for horror. And Halloween is the number one stop on that roadmap. And it did something to me. I just wanted to know more about Michael. He was such an enigma. And I've probably spent nearly 30 years tracking down what makes Michael tick, and I've come up probably the same as whenever I turned off Halloween for the first time. That's one of the ones that gave me the shivers. I like I mentioned Halloween 2 early on, but first time I sat through Halloween, it did something to me.
I mean, it's definitely in my top five, but I think the enduring power of Michael Myers, the proof is in the credits of the first movie when he's credited as the Shape. I've
Yeah,
always been so fascinated by that.
yeah,
They use
and
they use the name Michael Myers in the movie multiple times, and then at the end in the credits, he's just the Shape,
yeah,
and that really
it
just kind of sums up why he's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's you just can never pin him down into anything. He's man. He's more than man. He's yeah. He's vacant. He's the absence of personhood. He's just evil. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Reanimator. There's a portrait of Herbert West right over my shoulder. That rounds out my top three for sure. Reanimator is just an epic piece of cinema. All very different films.
Yeah, it's a good trio because they're very unlike each other.
Yeah. That just goes to show, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, how vast horror is and all the different functions it serves for us in society, and all the different reflections back of ourselves at us, and all the different reflections of society back at itself in a broader scale.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Totally true.
Michael, this has been a true pleasure. I hope you come back next year when your next novel comes out. We would love to have you.
Oh, I would be happy to.
All right. Well, as always, stay spooky, my friends.